Hey Jana, nice to see you. Nice to have you here. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Tea and Politics with Maya. This is a podcast where we explore leadership, power, empowerment, and all the different dynamics within the EU political scene. And today with us, we have Jana, who I'm so happy that we have you on because you were one of I think you were either the first or the second person I invited to be on my podcast, and we discussed it for a while. And now it's finally a good time for both of us to have this tea. Welcome. How are you?
I'm really good, Maya. Thank you very much. And I'm very excited about having this conversation. You're right that initially I was a bit, uneasy, and I'm just really excited about the questions and the conversation. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, of course. I was thinking that it would have been a really different conversation if we did that a year ago. When
Absolutely.
I think initially I invited you because I don't know where you're at 1 year later, but I think that even my headspace it's such in a different place from 1 year ago. Yeah. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation as well. If you're also interested, you can go back to some of the other episodes with another EU leaders. This is episode 10, if I'm counting correctly, and if the editing is going in the order I have in my mind. But there should be at least 10 more episodes worth watching by the time you see this one. So let's start. How did you end up in Brussels being a consultant? How come?
How did it all happen? Well, as you can tell, I'm English, and I grew up in a family in West Yorkshire. But one of the things was that our family had a really international mindset. So I was very, very lucky that from an early age, my mum's Danish, but grew up in England. My dad's sort of Yorkshire, born and bred. But there was this appetite to learn about the world through inviting people. So we always had people staying, and I had a Spanish exchange from the age of 8, and we had people from Japan and India, and we had people sort of musical. So I grew up with this really international mindset. And I suppose I'd always expected that I wouldn't end up staying and living in England. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I at some point thought I could go and, it was all the rage at the time to go and live in India or Latin America was my chosen destination because of learning Spanish. But I never did it. And it was always because I always felt, well, what would I bring? I even then sensed that there was a bit of a colonial mindset. We had this possibility. I could have traveled because I had those means, but I didn't want to go so far afield because I thought I wouldn't be bringing anything. I grew up in the 70s, 80s, extraordinarily lucky, got easy access to university, no loans that they have to pay now in the younger generation, studied really what I wanted to do with no idea where it would take me.
What did you study?
I studied firstly natural sciences, but it ended up being a combination of geography, quaternary studies, anthropology, really into human evolution, primatology, all that kind of stuff. Very kind of sort of eccentric. And then because I didn't really know what I wanted to do, I went on to do a master's in environment, development and policy. And from there, I was lucky enough to get hired by a young, rapidly growing private consultancy company based in Birmingham in England. They were really good at hiring lots of international people. I initially started working on a contract which they had for the European Commission on research and development and writing abstracts. And then I did a sort of what was then Cordis and still exists today all around the R&D program. So I used to be editing journals and editing stuff like that. It was just a bit of a random job that I applied for. Mm-hmm. But ended up staying there for 7.5 years. And that's what took me to Brussels because they won a contract to manage a network funded by, at that point, what became DG Energy and DG Transport. And they had a network funded of organisations promoting renewable energy. So I had a kind of background in environment, mm-hmm. but I also kind of did a little bit of social policy, a little bit of renewable energy, a little bit of this, that, and the other. I really enjoyed the job. I got good, really good experience in proposal writing, project management. And then I ended up in Brussels being sort of deputy manager of this coordination unit for the
When did you arrive in
It's
Brussels?
in 1997. So I'm now 27 years. Initially kind of going back and forth to the UK, spent those 2.5, 3 years in Brussels within Ecotech, this firm, which now is Ecoris. And it's kind of the precursor to all what now are these big consultancy firms like ICF that do a lot of work with the European Commission. It was a really nice environment, lots of interesting people, still close friends with a number of people that still work in the sector. But it was really profit driven, the mindset was not really where I was at. And I suppose always wanted to work in something that was doing some social good. And although the content of a lot of the work that I was doing was interesting, I wasn't really convinced by its value, to be honest. So I hit 30, applied to become coordinator of AVSO, which was the Association of Voluntary Service Organisations, which I got. It's a part-time job. And then I was also doing a bit of consultancy already by that stage with conservation volunteering. So I was really into nature conservation volunteering. In fact, that's what took me to Bulgaria. So I've led a couple of voluntary projects in Bulgaria, in Stara Zagora and in Varna.
Okay.
And so I did 2.5, 3 years of that. Bit of burnout.
The regular burnout.
Already interesting experience of being part of European civil society. First taste of advocacy. So there I was advocating on the European Voluntary Service. So we were promoting long-term volunteering for young people. Did a lot of training on EVS. Did quite a bit of travelling around Eastern Europe as well. And at the time, I thought it wasn't going anywhere. So I went back into consultancy for a couple of years. And then I had contracts, again, working on communication, mostly for DG Employment. It was the time when the anti-discrimination directives came out, and I was doing a bit of writing about the various EU initiatives and an editor for what was Social Europe. It was their newsletter. And then the job for Eurochild came up. That was back in the end of 2005, and I applied because I was interested in managing networks. I wanted to work in something of social good, and I got the job. The organisation was very young. It had just been established in 2004. So I joined in January 2006.
Mm-hmm. I thought Eurochild was older, I never thought that it's...
No, it's a new organisation. I mean, it emerged out of the European Forum for Child Welfare. Mm-hmm. So that was an existing network, which was the European branch of the International Forum for Child Welfare. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So there was sort of a core group of members that were already collaborating together. They'd had a number of projects. They already had established relationships. But it was also the time that politically child poverty was coming up on the agenda. Tony Blair had been elected in the UK, and they had this child poverty targets and more recognition that this needed to be as a politically salient topic, and it needed some political will. So, the president that hired me, Katrina Williams, she was then the director or CEO of Children in Wales. And, she'd had good relationships at the time with the commissioner, and we got that core grant. So that was the obviously Eurochild was created out of the ashes of EFCW. There was an existing relationship there, and they consolidated it, and they applied for a core grant, which enabled them to give them that sort of solidity of funding. I was with Eurochild from January 2006 until November 2022.
Wow, that's a long time. How many years is that?
16 years and 10 months.
Wow.
Yeah, it was
a lifetime.
It felt like a lifetime. Yeah. But and then during that time, I Eurochild was a member of Social Platform, and we were quite active. I got involved in the management committee. When would it have been? 2013 already, and then elected president in 2015. So I had that experience as well. Yeah, I mean, really, really, really lucky, I would say. I didn't have any life plan whatsoever. And I didn't train in children's rights, didn't train in EU advocacy. I think I've just been extraordinarily lucky, to be quite honest.
It's really interesting that you say that, and I'll try to make a compilation of all the women I've had sitting in here saying how lucky they are. And I think that's something that needs to be researched, because I'm either meeting the luckiest people or something with our perception of success involves luck a lot. I don't know if that's...
No, there was a little bit of skill. Just a little bit of skill.
Just a pinch on top of all the luck. And what do you do now?
So since just over a year, I registered as an independent consultant. Quite a bit of a break. I did a bit of teaching, and then I set myself up as a first independent consultant in April last year. So I'm doing a few bits and pieces, projects for philanthropy organisations that I had existing relationships with Eurochild. Very interesting, helping them navigate sort of opportunities at EU level. And I think there's more and more recognition among philanthropy of the need to support advocacy, support civil society in advocating and influencing the EU. So I'm advising them. And then I've also been able to do a few, say, sort of organisational evaluations, that sort of thing, for sister organisations, similar setups to what Eurochild had. So I'm finding, again, I mean, I don't think it's luck, but I think it is really a nice place to be able to deconstruct what I did well and what I did less well in Eurochild, and be able to learn from that experience and hopefully bring it into the environment, which, I'm just a fundamental believer in the value and the importance of a strong civil society for driving change, also for networks, in supporting organisations who are working at the grassroots, letting them get on with what they do well, but providing a framework for peer learning, exchange and influence. So, I'd hopefully be able to bring my experience to bear in those for those kinds of organisations. And I mean, we'll get to it because this is part of the conversation, but, given where the EU is going, how important it is for private philanthropy to play a role in supporting these organisations and recognise that what I call these infrastructure organisations, for civil society, is so crucial. And they, we've been extraordinarily, again, I think luck is going to be a bit of a theme, but it's the nature that we've had, 10, 20 years of the European Union putting resource behind progressive civil society organisations and networks to strengthen their capacity to do, to bring the EU to national and local and vice versa. And we can talk about how successful or not that's been, but, ultimately that's the goal. And I think, there's a real threat as to whether that is maintained. So
listening to you, I'm just thinking, so you arrived here, you've been here for 30 years, half of which, more than 50% of them in a leadership position within the EU bubble. I've been here just for 3.5. And to me, there's some things which are at the same time really annoying and irritating, and they make me crawl out of my skin on a daily basis when I see some type of behaviors and process in different areas. And there, on the other hand, there's so many inspiring things. And this mix, I think this magic of the EU bubble, I haven't seen it anywhere else. And I'm so curious for your experience in these 30 years. What type of processes have you seen that really make you feel that civil society is the actual stakeholder that needs to be there to monitor and support the political process? Like, what type of things have you seen which made you convinced that this is the good side, that the civil society is... You're one of the good guys, let's put it like that, and girls.
No, I have no doubt that we're one of the good guys in the whole ecosystem. But I think that there is a fundamental issue with the design of the ecosystem, and that we're all navel gazing. Well, not we're all. That's that's over exaggerated, but there is a little bit of navel gazing in the in the EU bubble. So, it's difficult. From where I stand now, I do feel that we have a lot of value to add in making sure that these EU governance processes that have been set up to monitor, support, strengthen member states' economic, social policies. It's important, it has a role to play. I think it's too top down, and in a way, civil society is precisely there to enable a stronger bottom up engagement and drive. I don't think we've done it as well as we could have done, because I think there's too much top down, and the funding mechanisms that they use at EU are, I think, a bit flawed. But in principle, it's important that it happens, and I think if there hadn't been civil society, it would have been a whole lot worse. There's no doubt. So I'm thinking about all of the work that goes around the European semester, and monitoring what is said in the national country reports and the European Commission reports, and now particularly since the recovery and resilience plans, how much of the EU money flows towards implementation of the priorities that member states set, and having a civil society voice within that whole process. I think it's absolutely critical as to kind of can you point to a particular impact? And is it perfect? Absolutely not. But I think it's really important that that's maintained and strengthened.
I think it also, this type of compromise, it's not a compromise system, but it's not in the best shape that it could be, the system we're functioning at, let's put it in this way, which means that every single bit of it, I believe, should have really conscious responsibility while being a part of it. And I think that's the most annoying for me when I see different actors, that sometimes they are present, but they're really not consciously exercising their responsibility. And I think that this is something that is making the system actually even sicker than it is. Because now speaking about the trimester, for example, I've been in the unique position to be part of this trimester evaluation from different perspectives. So once I was just as a NGO representative in a focus group back in, 10 years ago. Then when I was Sec Gen at ESPD, I was part from the EU bubble perspective. And a few years ago, I was part of the National Social and Economic Council, which is another step of it. And in all of those three things, I've seen processes where I clearly, it was very visible that things could be done better, but they were not. And I think this is my frustration sometimes with the EU being a bit distant or navel gazing, that it's just sometimes you can push for it to be better, but not everyone does. And I think that's, at the end of the day, the problem of the end receiver of policies.
I think it's all about incentives for engagement. So the way that EU funds civil society networks, it's kind of very controlling and very limiting to be pushing kind of an agenda that is determined by your member organizations. And I think that that's fundamentally wrong. And I think we're living the consequences of that. That said, I'm very conscious and nervous about criticizing, because you're then playing to a far right narrative of the bureaucracy as being, it's just being a whole bureaucratic machine, which has, totally pointless. And, for me, the architecture of the European semester process, fundamentally, it's built on an intent that it's a inclusive, collaborative policy-making agenda. I mean, you can argue whether it's inclusive of the issues that we want to address, but its architecture is precisely set up to be inclusive, which is why, if you've been in a Bulgarian focus group, in the Economic and Social Committee, and in a European-led NGO, different perspectives, different ways of engaging. The problem is, does then that narrow your you become so you don't see the wood for the trees. So you're looking at the trees as the semester rather than actually, well, what is it translating into when you map onto policy reform and use of EU funds at the national level. And because it's quite a sort of bureaucratic and energy intensive process, you can lose sight of the bigger picture. And I have no doubt that in civil society we risk doing that, and then we risk talking to ourselves or talking to the Commission when actually what needed to change was within the member states. And so whilst we invested, probably still do, continue to invest quite an extraordinary amount of energy in playing a role and making sure that we have a stake in those decisions. Meanwhile, got far right kind of gathering strength and a whole narrative that is completely counter to the values that we're trying to represent. So I don't have a solution. I have to be quite honest, and I spend a bit of time thinking about it. But at the end of the day, what we have is better than what would be promoted by.
No, I absolutely agree with you. And I think that we just need to be grateful for the system we have and still be able to shape it in a better way on an ongoing basis, because that's how it will make us more grateful.
It's not really gratitude. I wouldn't go there. I think it's, I think there have been lots of errors at the European Union level and in the bureaucratic level. If I think back to the number of years I've been there, and Commission officials have spent, I don't know how many days, months, years going into the minutiae of how civil society should monitor and report on its impact, and the whole annual reporting cycle of for your operating, all of these things. You're tying yourselves in knots, expending time and energy in a way that is absolutely not creating change on the ground and not enabling civil society to build capacity, skills, influence at the national level. So you end up with this tremendous disconnect, which is, I think, a fundamental cause of the rise of the anti-EU discourse, anti-rights, far-right movement in Europe and at the EU level and national level. And I think there are very, very many legitimate complaints that we are kind of an elite speaking for groups that actually don't necessarily see themselves being heard in the narratives that we have at EU level.
We will go to the new elections and the way that the European Parliament looks right now and the right wing. But before that, I want to go back to your child years for a while, because I'm really fascinated, because I think that you may be one of the few really long-standing. 17 years is really a lot of time.
I'm not the longest standing leader at EU level.
In civil society, 17 years is a lot. And also, from a perspective of a viewer and somebody who was professionally interested in Eurochild before, I was observing your network, and it was impressively and massively growing. And I really think that this is a knowledge that needs to be out and about. So how did you do that? I know that it's never one man or one woman's job. It's never that. But what was the vision you and your board and your team shared that today we have a big and healthy Eurochild as a network?
Yes, it grew, and I think now there are over 200 members and 43 countries, I think. And it's a very substantive network. At the end of the day, children's rights is an area where there are hundreds, thousands of organisations working across Europe. And the topics that we're covering, very broad. You're advocating for recognition of the rights of children across Europe. So the potential for the network was always very broad. It's always going to be a broad church. I think for an organisation like Eurochild, there is definitely strength in numbers, and as long as we are providing a a useful service for members. You know, the value added to organizations joining the network was that peer support, peer exchange, community, friendships. I mean, there are people in the Eurochild network from the membership that, you know, known each other for decades and are really close, and that sort of solidarity. And then, you know, we were also, we have had significant impacts on influencing the European Union, which then translates into policy documents, that translates into reforms at national level, that translates into channeling of EU resource and changing policies at national level. So, yeah, I think that there's an appetite for organisations to be part of that. So I don't think there's a sort of necessarily magic formula, and I don't think necessarily, depending on the topics, you know, it's not always size that counts. But for Eurochild, it's a broad church. There's a real need for advocacy and political support for children's rights, and that network flourished. It was always a challenge. You know, you're always kind of navigating this breadth and then focus, and you know, we had a number of thematic priorities: children in alternative care, early childhood development. You know, how do you kind of capture all of that work? How do you maintain and follow through so you've got the granularity of the information that actually really drills down on what's needed in transforming child protection systems? That requires quite a bit of capacity. But it's I suppose the main kind of thread of my leadership was that we needed to be listening to the membership. You know, we needed to be responsive to what organisations needed at grassroots, at national level, to push the dial, either in the services and the practices with vulnerable children and families, or at a national level where you're really changing the policies at national level.
That must have been challenging, because you're hearing really different voices. Of course, they're all going towards we need support in supporting children's rights policies and families. But I can imagine that a voice from the south of France and the voice from east of Slovakia, or I don't know, from the south of Bulgaria, they're coming in amplified to you in Brussels, but people expect different things from you as a network today.
Well, I mean, yes, there's an extraordinarily different diverse of realities. There's no doubt, you know, that the systems have evolved differently, lots of cultural differences, language differences. But what draws them to a network is precisely being able to learn across those countries, you know, and see how it happens elsewhere, from north, south, east, west. And then, you know, you pick and choose what is applicable to your situation. I mean, I think National Network for Children in Bulgaria has been one of our, and I talk about our Eurochild, you know, hi George, if you're listening to this. You know, they were seeing the growth of that network and what they achieved, and also some of the cross-fertilization of ideas. So the report card, which was, I mean, it's not a mirror of the one done by Children's Rights Alliance Ireland, but it was definitely kind of inspired by that, you know, and we could point to all sorts of examples. And I guess, you know, one of the challenges in networks and promoting the network for funding is that there are so many spin-offs that there's no way of tracking. So, you know, and one of the nicest things, I mean, quite recently I was speaking to an academic in the north of England who'd gone to a Eurochild event in Ireland in 2016, and then from there had been invited to Finland and was talking to kind of the reform of the child protection system in Finland, and, you know, all sorts of, which I would never have known about, because there was no sort of capturing of the reporting from the national level, but, you know, in conversations afterwards. So that's what I like to think, that there was all of these sort of spin-offs and connections that were made, and I found, you know, speaking to your question, being part of the Eurochild network, you knew what the organisation stood for. So even if your realities were completely different, or you were focusing on slightly different issues, there was something that you always had in common.
Mm-hmm. You have your North.
Yeah, your North Star. Absolutely. Yeah.
What type of skills you were required to have to be in that position? Because I think that it's a lot of them you can carry on, you develop them in a different, the different paths that you have, but some of the, I don't know, my theory is that nobody's really prepared to be in a bubble leadership position. And I think that once you occupy that space, you realize very fast, if you're the right person for the position, what needs to be acquired by yourself, so you can be occupying this space responsibly. So what type of leadership skill sets were you required to have and develop while being there?
I mean, it is a bit of a unicorn position. And I think being a leader in an EU civil society network, I don't think there's anybody who ticks all the boxes. I mean, you've got to have so many different skill sets. So for me, I was very clear about vision. I think about bigger picture. I'm very passionate. I love people. I love the network. But I really fell down on a number of different issues. So maybe we don't want to go too much into that. But I did really struggle, I suppose, in the sort of people management side of things. And you talk about me being in leadership responsibilities, yes, but I hadn't done big team management. That was a bit of an area where I fell down. And you said, that you realise pretty quickly whether it's the right thing for you or not. And I know that I had that little voice niggling from day one until I quit. Actually, I can't really do that job. I mean, it was a bit ridiculous. Wow. But I had a really...
You're great at your job.
I had a little... But what regardless, it's about what your self-concept is. And I had quite severe insecurity about my self-concept. So that was a challenge for me, because in a leadership role, you really don't want to have that level of insecurity. So there are things I did really well and I really enjoyed. And I, as you say, grew the network, developed lots of projects, lots of relationships. We have definitely had an impact. And there were things that I, really struggled with, which I think at the end of the day, I was exhausted because I was trying to do everything, even the things that I wasn't very good at. And I didn't really know how to bring on board people who could do that better than me. So that's where I got unstuck, unfortunately. But it was a really, really wonderful experience, wonderful journey. And I think Eurochild today is a strong organisation making an impact. So I'm proud of what we did. Yeah.
The self-doubt and the little voice within your head, I think that we've all had it at some point. In this setting, I've spoken to maybe 20 women in different positions and a few men, actually. Eventually there will be men on this podcast. But I also spend a lot of time talking to Angela Philip. She's forever my favorite coach / executive, mentor / just inspiring powerhouse of a woman. And she was really particular about, you have to talk with this voice, because just ignoring the voice that just says, well, you're not good enough, that it will forever be whispering within your ear. And I think that also there is a part of the feministic filter for which I'm seeing this. I think that many women hear that, and I'm not sure that, I don't know if that's just something that women do. I'm not sure if men also hear this voice very loudly if they're in a leadership position. But I really have heard a lot of women share that experience. And I've had my fair share of whispering that I'm not a good leader, and that I'm, the things that you yourself can say to yourself are the most cruel ones, because you know your flaws in the most cruel way possible. And you can always make a point that nobody, no psychologist, no therapist, no coach can argument with, because you know yourself. And I think it's really interesting, because I would never, watching you from the outside, I would never even think for a second that this woman can have any self-doubt ever. No, really. It was really, I think it's also a good lesson for especially young women who are going now in managerial leadership position to listen to this conversation. Because, I mean, if you had this moment of self-doubt while being for like 15, 16 years on ahead of one of the most influential EU networks, I had that as well, as somebody who's also been in position of leadership for the last 15 years. Maybe it's just something that we need to accept that we have and fight with, and not just let it flourish within our head.
Yeah. I mean, for me, being in that role, it's pretty intense, as you know. It's pretty full on when you're asked to do those sorts of roles. And I guess, you know, I gravitated towards the things that I knew I could do and do well. I knew, I mean, you know, you had all sorts of flaws, and that was the insecurity. But I suppose there's I don't think I really needed to have time to be able to just accept me fully as a whole person with strengths and weaknesses and flaws. So, you know, I think the insecurity is when you let those flaws kind of take precedent, you know, and in a sense, it's, you know, it's just being accepting who we are as fully fledged people, and as, you know, as leaders, we're not necessarily different from other people, but what I would say is the quality of leadership, and this is not specific to EU bubble, it's a quality of leadership per se, is integrity, self-awareness, honesty, communication, all of those sorts of skills. And that does actually come with just accepting that there are things you do well and things you do not do well. And that shouldn't be a reason for you not being competent or able to do the job. And sort of just being able to put those on the table and enable others to flourish, you know, because I think that was where I got stuck, was because I wasn't able to do things well. I thought that I just needed to work far harder to do it, and that's really about self-awareness, isn't it? I think more than anything else.
The integrity part of what you said really is, I think that's my favorite part of any leadership advice ever, that as long as you have integrity, there's the direction is you growing. The moment you lose your integrity, I think that's game over. And you have to, your only task from then on will be to go back to your integrity. I think that's the formula in my opinion. So I think that also in a EU bubble context and civil society context, integrity is the crucial part. It's the key point where we need to have our attention at. So going back to how a network, you run a network. So you have the team, you have the members, you have the institutions, you have the board, you have the external partners, you have the partners who are on your side, but then you have the people who are opposing your views. So this is a really complicated matrix. And in order to be successful in that, you need to really be in sync with your team, obviously, but then also with your board. And we had, I think, one of the really interesting discussions, we had a really long conversation on the importance of boards and how boards are composed and what type of people we need in boards. So I really want to go that with the filter of integrity. So what's your experience with boards? What do you think should be in the minds of people who are occupying position of governance in civil society?
Yeah, I mean, I've really been very interested in the whole topic of governance. And I came across kind of exploration of what governance is, and particularly in civil society. But, you know, basically it's all about the complex process of collaborating with people for the common good. So how do you, so the governance needs to be really, it's ultimately all about relationships, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And the quality of those relationships. I would, again, very lucky in my journey in Eurochild, being somebody that was by nature very self-critical and demanding of myself. I talked about Katrina Williams, CEO of Children in Wales, who was president for the first 6 years. Very nurturing personality. And then I had Maria Herzog, president, with whom still incredible respect for, real kind of visionary on children's rights in Europe. So I really leaned in on that support, and it was given what I've just said about sort of my levels of insecurity, they were a real source of support. And then it kind of I lost the plot a little bit. And I think, it was precisely because I was leaning in a little bit too much into the support that I needed from the board, rather than actually owning my own power and being the leader that I needed to be in times when, we had COVID, we had all of those stuff going on. And I wasn't really equipped to then just like, this is my leadership style, this is what I need, and really set those boundaries. So it kind of got a little bit lost along the way. And if I think back, that was also because we probably didn't spend enough time defining what we needed from the governing board, what were the limits, what were the boundaries, how could they best support, what would also be, and I think this is really, really crucial. I'm a conflict avoider, so I managed for over a decade, 12, 13 years, to pretty much kind of whittle my way around not having conflicts. When we had to then have conflicts, I just wasn't equipped. But I think you need to go into governance understanding what's your relationship with conflict and how do you manage those, and also being very transparent about power dynamics. Really important, because there are power dynamics. You want a governing board that's enabling the staff, the team, the secretariat, and the leader to be at their very best. But sometimes that requires a bit of really looking oneself in the mirror and saying, well, how is this actually playing out in practice, and is it enabling? Because in our particular case, that we got unstuck in that there. So governing boards ultimately about relationships, bringing out the best of people, making sure that the secretariat feel that they're in charge with the leader, and that they are also drawing on the qualities and the skills and the experience that the management board, the governing board has, and being really honest and open about what skills you need, and doing more self-evaluation, because I think that's something that's really important in any governing board, to be looking at, well, what's actually happening. Are we getting what we need from the Secretariat to enable the management board to be thinking long term, to be helping with the strategy, to be discussing and debating the real, fundamental issues around the mission of the organisation and its impact? Or are we getting bogged down in some of the detail, and are we trying to kind of sort things out, which actually, we shouldn't really be sorting out as a governing board? We should actually be letting them get on with it. Lots of that, which, in hindsight, we could have clarified earlier on before getting into muddy waters. And I think that was an experience in leadership, of what you need from a governing board, and how you support the governing board to give you what you need.
I think that there is really direct link between the way that a board functions and the resilience of an organization in the long run. Not only, of course, board should change either 2 years, 4 years, but I've been So before joining EASPD, I worked a lot with the European Youth Forum, and now I support Jeff in different ways. I also work with the European Women's Lobby on a couple of stuff. So I see different. It's a unique place to see different European networks from the inside out. Let's put it like that. And I see that there's really, like, you can always prognose a crisis if you look at the board, not only within the executive person. And you can always prognose a crisis if you look at the team. And it's not about separate conflict situation, or it's not about, I don't know, an external crisis even. It's always about the things that you can identify really from a conversation. Do people fear to speak their mind, for example? Do people feel free to share their opinion without having the fear of consequences after that? Do people respect each other? Like respect, not pretend to respect and tolerate, but respect as I respect you as an individual, and I know your value is as much as my value. Like really basic things. And so my question to you now is, having said that, with the boards and understanding of how boards should work, do you see that link with resilience of networks? Or what's your experience with healthy boards and resilience of networks? These two topics. Do you see a link? Let's start from there.
Oh, definitely. I think one of the keys to success is a strong board that is self-reflective and has opportunities to be visionary, to be thinking about strategy, and also to be challenging the secretariat, but in a healthy and supportive way. All those sorts of things. And I think we don't probably pay enough attention to board composition and also in the leadership, how you, as I said earlier, how you support the board in order to play that role, giving induction training to new incoming board members, for example, all of those sorts of things that would be really important. So yes, I mean, I think a strong, healthy board is pretty fundamental to the success. And one of the things I was always thinking about, well, is that to do with most of the networks, at least the ones I know, are governed by elected representatives from the membership. So you're always working with people that have come through the membership, and on the one hand, that's really good and really important because they know the members' realities. On the other hand, there could be, and I suppose organisations get around that sometimes by co-opting experts to be in the network, because sometimes you do need some critical expertise within the management board that's not then within the representatives of the membership, but also that necessarily each of those members is coming from mostly national member organisations. So their familiarity with the EU level and what's needed to manage the kind of multi-stakeholder interests at EU level, and the funders and the EU Commission and all the institutions, so they're not always able to understand kind of the complexities of what's happening at the secretariat level. Well, actually, if you've got the right people, they don't need to, because actually that their role is to kind of as I said earlier, just let you get on with it, but keep but yeah, board dynamics are really important, no doubt about it. And I think in retrospect, there are sort of practices, tools that you can make sure are there in order to really keep the board on track.
If we have to make a list of do's and don'ts, what should people avoid while being in a governance position, in your opinion? Because we always give recommendations for what to do, and I think that's equally important, is to give very clear recommendation of what not is to be. It's not a good idea, because sometimes being in control can really have different nuances, and to monitor something and be in control and govern in a governance position, I think can go in really different ways. And of course, and I mean, part of this conversation is also ignited through personal experience. Part of it is because there is this interesting process going on in one of the European networks where their board kind of disappeared and they all resigned. And I think that's also an interesting signal that this is not an easy job. And it's not actually a job. In most cases, it's a voluntary thing. You either get an annual fee, which is like ridiculously low for the amount of work that you do. So I'm being this particular because I think that if we don't publicly acknowledge how difficult it is to be in a board, in a position of governance, either a vice president, a president, a member, a control committee, a treasurer, all of those things are really difficult if you're doing them right. So this is why I'm digging deeper. What should we not do when we are in that type of position?
Let's focus on what we should do initially. So, so as I said earlier, the most important thing for me is the quality of the relationships in the board specifically.
Okay.
So you're really working on a positive board dynamic and recognizing the responsibility of all of the board members towards the organization for, I mean, you need to go down into the nuts and bolts of the financial sustainability and all of those sorts of things, but also that kind of coherent vision and mission and ownership of the organization. And as you said, all of the board members are doing that voluntarily. And so there needs to be a real recognition of the value added that they're bringing and being, and I think coming in eyes wide open about what's expected, what not to do. I think we said it. It's letting the secretariat and the leadership get on with what they know best. So that sort of steering of the organisation needs to be left to, and the support for the leadership to give, help the leadership see where the gaps are and enable then the leadership to fill, solve, whatever. It's about sort of
do
exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, I had a personal experience just that I felt that I was driving the car. The president was holding onto the steering wheel, telling me to go in a different direction, and forcing my foot on the accelerator. That was the vision. That was how I articulated a certain situation. Again, I don't want to put blame on anybody, because I appreciate as a leader there were things that I could have put in place to avoid that scenario, but it was very scary. It was very uncomfortable for me. So because I was being pushed in a direction that I didn't feel comfortable to do. And there will be issues. There will be differences of opinion, and if those differences of opinion are such that actually the Secretary General or the Director, the CEO, is not aligned with the governing board, well, there are ways to accommodate that and make those. At the end of the day, you and I have been in employee situations. We are accountable to the board, and having clarity early up front. Being transparent, being open. Look, there's a misalignment here. We don't see eye to eye. And as I said earlier, for me, that was also setting my own boundaries and not allowing myself to say, well, actually, I'm doing something that I don't feel comfortable with here, but I wasn't able to say it. And so that then prolonged a lot of discomfort and danger for the organisation, because that's not what's going to be.
It's not healthy,
That's not healthy. That's not the way an organisation should function at its best.
I've been in two scenarios where I felt uncomfortable with different boards and with different presidents, and they took really different paths once I confronted, because you said you're not a conflict. I'm exactly the opposite. If there is a problem, I go and I'm like, look, there is a problem, do it now. Let's solve it immediately, which is so unhelpful in some situations. It's so unhelpful, but yeah, I'm learning as well. So what I meant is that I've been twice, more or less within the same scenario, where there is a problem. I'm a leadership position. I have a board, I have a president, and I go and actually the first example I can see, because it's with George. And it was, I work, he was a board, he was a president of where I used to work with. And both him and we have strong personalities, and we clashed. Not once, not twice. I love him so much, this dear man, but it's really difficult sometimes to work with somebody who is really opinionated as him and because I'm also opinionated on certain issues. And we had a few rough conversations where we were very clear where our boundaries are, our personal boundaries, and where we believe the right and healthy center is for the organization. Because I think we were both, maybe mature is not the right word, but we were both conscious enough to understand that we are, in this moment, part of this organization's life, but this organization is bigger than myself and it's bigger than him. And we were both, in a way, compromising with a bit of himself and a bit of myself so we can move on. And it worked. But it was not easy, and it was not even pleasant. Exactly. No, this day was a bad day in my calendar, but it was a great year at the end of the day, because we had this difficult conversation. And then I've been also in a really similar situation with another president, where I was severely disrespected after that. So I'm still trying to figure out what's the nice formula, because I thought that after this first situation, I had the right formula for what is the good balance between an employee and executive position and then a board and a president, but then I was wrong. So I think it's a really interesting conversation, especially for healthy civil society. In this right-wing rise, we need healthier, more resilient organizations. That means also good boards, whatever good means.
And I mean, I think you're missing a sort of vital difference as well in the European civil society is, we are all working with different people of different cultures and different nationalities. And you and George clash, but you speak the same language, you've similar cultural references. At EU level, it is one of those really big challenges. I mean, when I say leadership qualities are the same regardless of whether you're an EU civil society or not, well, the big difference here, and it's across Europe, it's this whole big political experiment of 27 EU member states, and coming from different backgrounds. And it remains challenging intercultural management and different styles, different ways of communicating. But I mean, a lot of it is really goodwill, and also having some clear boundaries and rules of behaviour, codes of conduct. I have that sort of other hat, which maybe I can bring into the conversation, because I'm now in the shareholder council of the family business. And, every single meeting, we read through a whole list of code of conduct about how we're going to communicate, how we will be attentive to people's feelings, and all of these sorts of things. It's been important for us, So I'm contrasting governance at EU level, where you are navigating massive intercultural differences. On the other extreme, I'm in a family business where we all have similar cultural references, indeed similar great-grandparents, same great-grandparents, but you're navigating family dynamics, which can be equally, if not more,
more complicated than the EU,
and potentially conflictual. But I think being really open and and I think that those sort of boundary setting and being very clear when people join the board, what they can, what they can't do. And there's all sorts of very good sort of governance documentation on that. And trust. Ultimately you can't work unless you have a trust between people, and particularly between the leadership and the board. Can we move on?
We are moving to shifting the mirror back to us. So okay. How do we keep ourselves accountable? I think that's also very important while working, especially in civil society. Maybe in a business setting, of course it's important, but in a different context. But within the human rights field, you really have to practice what you preach. So how do you keep yourself accountable? How have you kept yourself accountable through these years?
I think I mentioned earlier, I'm quite hard on myself. I do set myself quite high standards. So I'm not sure that's necessarily, it's almost in this last year, my process has been, I'm actually not a to-do list, or I'm not, I can let go a little bit. That's been my journey in the last year and a half, I think. But that's my own personal trajectory. I feel that I do put quite a bit of pressure on myself to be continuously improving and being a better person and that sort of thing. But, I don't have anybody to whom I'm responsible for other than my children at the moment, which I do try and hold myself accountable to that. In a leadership role, you mentioned earlier how important psychological safety is in a team. And that requires a lot of kind of transparency and ability to read the room and read where people are coming from, what's sort of not said. And I think to have that level of intuition to connect with people at a more profound level, you just need to be really well yourself. As a person, you need to be well resourced and feeling good about your skin. And that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges that we have in civil society and the human rights movement, is because the pace is so fast and you're continuously feeling that you've not done enough and there's too much to do. You find that you're not in a good place yourself, so therefore you're less equipped to be in tune with the people that you're working with and the people that are around you. And that's a vicious circle, because however committed and passionate and, hardworking we are, if we're pushing ourselves beyond the boundaries that are healthy for ourselves, you're going to have toxic impact on other people, regardless of whether you feel, it's just the nature of the business. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges we have as a sector, because a lot of us are driven, by particular issues of, wanting to make a difference and wanting to change the world. And I think just sort of sitting back and accepting, our own limitations and who we are, and that whole, a lot of talk about self-care and being accepting who you are, all that sort of thing. But actually, it's absolutely crucial to do that in the work if you are to have a positive impact out there in the world. Because if you're striving to change something externally, but you haven't dealt with your inner demons, probably gonna get unstuck somewhere along the way. One of the things I read recently was, what you suppress shows up somewhere along the way, and so if you're being accountable for your behaviour, that requires a lot of being able to step back and feel good about who you are, what you're doing, not wanting to put too much pressure on, so that you are able to be in a space that is in tune with and helps other people feel good about who they are. That's
we need to do our internal homework in a way.
Yeah.
Last year when the day I was fired, I started to look for new jobs. And I think the day after, I realized that I'm scared to death that I have to go to a new job. Because I was so unwell mentally and eventually physically that I think I would have been a really horrible manager these first months. And still now, I'm still not ready to be back in a leadership position. I'm so, there's so many pieces of me which are damaged that I'm just really not there. And I would be not happy if somebody like that is managing me. So but I think that was initially when the inertia and the fear of, oh my God, I'm going to be unemployed. Oh my God, I will be I'm not in this fancy position anymore. My ego is hurt. My reputation is hurt. My soul is crying and I need to get back. But then it was literally one day after, I was I really don't want to go back. I shouldn't go back because I'm so... the accountability voice started to be more and more amplified. And I started to read a lot about well-being and mental health. And there is also my understanding now that a lot of people, me included, feel that we're failing at well-being because it's becoming this trendy thing that you need to have a concrete setting with so a yoga, a walk, a herbal tea with the candle being herbal tea and candles are part of that. But I couldn't have that for a while. And I think that accountability and mental health and well-being look really different for each of us. And we are feeling that we're failing at that because it's being put in an impossible position. You cannot be accountable every day if you're unwell. You cannot be in a leadership position if you're unwell and be accountable in the same time. You need time. And it's not something that you can do once and be well and go back.
There's so much documentation and research on this and this sense of, I know now, although I didn't really know at the time, just how overstimulated my nervous system was. So I was hugely psyched and I had no real awareness because I was probably way too much up in my head. And that sort of whole unraveling is still unraveling, and we've talked a lot about kind of my role in Eurochild. I really identified with that role. I was really, it was very much kind of my sense of self. My sense of self was so tied to being in that role, which was very unhealthy, both for me and for the organisation. So I applied for a few jobs prior to leaving and, desperate to kind of get out. And I didn't, I wasn't taken on. So yeah, it was ultra scary, really scary. I thought I was just falling into an abyss.
Yeah.
And there were other things going on at the same time. It was just it, but yeah.
But you move on.
You move on, and I think all of those steps that you take gradually, and then are a necessary part of the journey. And now, when as I said earlier, sort of looking back, I find that I can see things much more clearly in hindsight, and as I would like to think that sort of experience can be useful in the future for other people and other organisations. So I completely kind of go off on a side tangent here because I'm really total tangent. I'm not a football fan, but of course, we just had the Euro finals, and And the last two games, the semi and the finals, I went to see with a friend. And it got me into it. And then I listened to a podcast about Sir Gareth Southgate, you know, the guy who's the... You don't know.
No. Should I lie? Should I say no? I don't. I'm sorry.
Okay. So he's the manager of the English team.
Of course.
And he's been very criticised and, you know, he's not very unpopular and all these sorts of things. But it was a Guardian podcast, so it was quite generous. And they basically talked about him deconstructing the fact that he missed a goal, a penalty kick in whether it was finals with Germany or semi-finals. If people are football fans, they're probably cringing here. Absolute cringing.
Look, I don't think there is a huge risk of football fans looking at this.
But you never know. Anyway, the reason I bring it up was because what they talked about in that particular podcast resonated with me, because he's used that biggest failure in his professional life as the entry door into his professional contribution in the future. So I'm trying to imagine that the knots that I tied myself up into as a precursor to me leaving the job in Eurochild in 2022 will, as I unravel and as I come to terms with it and as I grow as a human being, will enable me to find work that can really make a positive contribution in a way that I'm not stretching myself beyond what is healthy for my sense of self and well-being, and doing. Yeah, I don't need to change the world to be a valuable human being anymore. You know.
Wow, I will just remember that and repeat it every morning. Yeah. I thank you for sharing that soccer analogy. I'm the only one within my family who is really so not interested into soccer. And it's really bad because my grandfather used to be the captain of the local football team. So it's not even... it's really disrespectful that I don't follow soccer, but I don't. And I went to one, there was this screen in Stockholm where they had the screening of Romania and Belgium. And one of our friends who is Bulgarian and Romanian, and we went and we were cheering for Romania. And we realized it's really a bad idea because obviously everybody's cheering for Belgium. But yeah, so I think I enjoy the stories around soccer. But I'm not excited by it. I don't know why. I try every World Cup and every Euro Cup to follow it. It's just not, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's just in anything that there are interesting characters and stories behind. And what triggered for me was the story of Sir Gareth Southgate using his professional failure as the gateway into deconstructing why, how, what was the stress that happened. And then apparently England were, won several games on penalties. So, it's clearly been able to train and support the team to what something had gone right there. Maybe I'm blowing up those 16 years in Eurochild too much in my life. But they were important. It was an important period of my professional career, and as I said before, I identified very much with what I was doing there. So from there are a number of lessons that I am still unpacking and still learning, and hopefully will be of value.
I'm sure they will be. Even now they are. Well, let's go to the consultancy part. I'm following you on LinkedIn and your journey within the consultancy world. If somebody wants to do that transition between being an employee in civil society and just being a consultant, only that, not combining the roles, what would your advices be for that person? Because we've discussed that it's not an easy transition, and that type of self-identification with an organization is not necessarily there, for good or for bad. So how do you go through it?
Yeah, it's a bit scary. You're sort of thinking, oh, who am I? And you're a bit at the bottom of the pile, and you've got to apply for stuff, and few things that I've sent in were not successful, and people don't want me, and will they just forget me? You know, have all of that kind of banter going on in the background. But I mean, I've done 30 years of work, and I suppose where I am now and what I'm hoping is that I will be able to do work which represents who I am and represents my skills and expertise. So it's sort of stripping down to who you are. It's quite exposing, but I suppose it's also quite validating, hopefully. If somebody's going into it, well, I mean, we're lucky in Belgium in that there are plenty of communities that you can hook into. I attended a Freelancers in Belgium networking meeting in...
Shout out.
Yeah, good one for freelancers in Belgium. They had a networking meeting in December. You know, Belgium, particularly Flanders, lots and lots of entrepreneurs and young people who are starting up on their own. So there's all that community. We have also a women independent consultants group, I think, in Brussels. Meets every 6 weeks, 2 months or so. That's also a good source of support. I reached out early on when I was deciding to become an independent to a number of people that I knew through Eurochild who themselves become independent consultants that helped me along the way. So, you know, there are a number of us out there, and I think that's a valuable community to be part of and to be in solidarity with. Is it forever? I don't know. I mean, I'm not applying for jobs, but I'm not imagining that, you know, if something came up, I wouldn't not go back full time. Right. Well, right now I wouldn't, because actually I really appreciate the flexibility. Right now I'm really enjoying just that possibility to adapt my week, not to be tied to a 9 to 5. And I have been fortunate to have some interesting projects. I'm doing a bit of work with the Tanya Stream Fund in Bulgaria. Not in Bulgaria, I should say. They work in Bulgaria, and I'm working on leveraging the EU funds and policies, which is kind of my thing. And I was lucky also through the Belgian system to have coaching, initially with Securex. That, I don't know if you'd heard of that. Was it the grieving cycle? Put it in the last LinkedIn post. That talks about all of sort of the emotional roller coaster of leaving a job to which you were very attached. Mm-hmm. So something that you should kubla somebody.
I think I read it. I'm not sure if I'm pretty sure it's from the same article. The fact that you go back, that it's not
it's not linear, you know, but there's a whole kind of documented, evidenced kind of grieving process of an anger and guilt and shame and positivity, and then you can go loop over again, and you know there's multiple layers. But just accepting and knowing, well, that's just part of the journey. And then I had Zoltan Janelsi, who was also allocated and done some work with other colleagues of ours in the Brussels scene. And he connected me with somebody on my website. And then I did a photo shoot, which was really excruciating. And I felt honestly, Alex, if you're watching this, you were fantastic. And it was a joy that he worked with me, but you know, it's not something necessarily feel that comfortable with. Is
the personal branding part?
It's it grates a little bit, but hey, you know, it's part and parcel of what I need to do. So yeah, that's where I'm at. I've got my website, janahainsworth.eu, and I do spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. Probably too much time on LinkedIn, but I do.
It's a healthier social media than all of the other ones. I think.
I mean, you know, I do have an account with Twitter still or X and Facebook.
I hate it so much.
It's sort of really hits me how much hate and gratuitous criticism and opinions that are not grounded in anything are floating around there. So yeah, probably need to completely steer clear, but sometimes I do kind of look at it because it makes me realize just what we're up against.
Well, I mentioned earlier in the conversation that we'll go towards this fragmentation between right wing and left wing and centrist and opinions in society, and I think that social media is a good entry point for that topic. I think it also makes sense to say that this conversation is recorded a couple of days after Donald Trump. There was an attempt to kill him during a political rally, which is really, I think it's really scary. I don't think that I can be seen as a supporter of, honestly, not even Biden or Trump. Yeah, they're both strange in their way, but whoever you support, obviously, it's not. It shouldn't be considered normal that you can go to a political event and shoot at people. And I've been reflecting a lot since the last days on how we have normalized aggression in so many ways that actually even now there are people who say that, well, he deserved it because he's been very polarizing. And I really can't see that point as a valid point. So how do we make sure that we can go back to a normal and not to this new normal, whatever that means in politics?
Well, no, I think you're pointing to something that is seriously dysfunctional, and I've no doubt that social media amplifies that. It's really big. That sort of I think we had a period of time where there was a lot more self-censoring. There were boundaries about what you could and you couldn't say, and it feels now that gloves off, free for all, people can do and say, and that's a really horrible world to be living in. And yeah, I think the prospect of the elections in the United States is really, really scary. And ultimately, I think Donald Trump is anti-democratic, and also what you see building up, should he be elected, sort of dismantling all kinds of civil right protections through this Project 25 scheme. It's the little I've read and listened to just fills me with horror. So we're living, I think, in extraordinarily difficult and challenging times, and unfortunately, that whole episode with the rally and the shooting, might well feed support for Trump, given it sort of seemed to be completely invincible.
In Europe, we also had a similar thing. Fico, there was an attempt of shooting the Slovakian politician as well. And I'm just feeling that there is a lack of communication, both in society, but then also between politicians themselves. And then I don't see anyone actively working for this to be paused and to go into a recovery mode. Because I don't believe that society can work like that. Not one society. Maybe different societies can just live their fragmented lives. But a society cannot work like that. We cannot produce, we cannot make policies, we cannot grow, we cannot develop, we cannot innovate, nothing. I don't believe that you can just continue living if you're not talking to each other.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I would say there are people working on it. One of the organizations I follow closely is the Apolitical Foundation and the Multitudes Foundation. So they're really trying to invest and support political leaders who are in it for public good, public service, there to build cross-party collaboration, strengthening the centre ground. So there is obviously, we're talking about it now. There's very wide recognition that our societies are more and more polarized and toxic, and that does not at all contribute to good governance. If you're wanting a government who will improve people's lives, you need to reach across political boundaries. You need to engage experts. You need to involve.
Behave.
You need to be civil to one another. You need to listen to lived experience. You need to be inclusive. You need to reach out to the marginalized groups that are feeling disenfranchised. There's all sorts of things that we know need to happen, and the political extremes are running directly counter to that, because they're basically running on fear, hate, insecurity, whatever. It's and exploiting those sort of those fractures in society. And it's
Where are children's policies in all of that, and children's rights?
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm still very much a committed child rights advocate. I think, for me, support for children, it has a very philosophical underpinning. That Khalil Gibran, the Prophet, chapter about children. Children are not our children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, not from you.
Oh wow!
It's very beautiful, very, very beautiful poem, and that that essence of children having being agency, having independence, being living human beings from day one. That, and then that being codified in the UNCRC. That for me represents just a flourishing of human goodness, but we are living in times when children's rights are actually one of the kind of front lines of this sort of anti-rights, anti-gender, anti-LGBTQI, all of that. Return to conservative values, return to family. They're right at the cutting edge of that. And for me, it's sort of fundamentally that we need to support children flourish to become everything that they're capable of becoming. And we don't live in societies where you've got two-parent families nurturing their children in an insular place and the children grow and flourish. They just don't. It takes a village to raise a child. You need society. You need systems. The education, health, childcare, social care, supporting families living in poverty. All of that is down to good policy. You need good policies to make an environment where children can flourish and grow to their full potential. And the UNCRC is a guiding light for that to happen. And, I think there's been extraordinary progress in enabling member state or all countries signed up. It's the widest ratified convention on the planet. And if that's taken seriously, there's all sorts of possibilities for governments to put in place policies and supports that genuinely vision children growing to their full potential. And at the end of the day, it's easier to build strong children. It's very cliche, but it's easier to build strong children than mend broken men and women. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty basic, and
it's an obvious.
Pretty kind of, you think, well, why? It's pretty universal. You would have thought, why would anybody argue against that? But there is a real kind of challenge to understanding children as being rights holders and having public policies that support their flourishing.
There is, and I think that also correlates very well with the beginning of our conversation and the resilience of organizations which are stakeholders in that system. Because if that safeguarding is not coming from the politicians and the state, then you need to really advocate better, more efficient, louder about your work. And I think that there is this trend in the last couple of years, maybe not, I'm observing it for the last couple of years, that now civil society organizations are expected not only to do their job as either service providers or just being there as what their function and role is, but they also need to do really decent fundraising. They really need to do excellent communication. They need to do excellent advocacy. They need to be proficient in speaking with policymakers. And I think that in a way is just a bigger burden on civil society, while actually the whole other system is really not interested that much into talking to civil society about children's rights.
Yeah. I mean, I think it looks different all across Europe. Yeah. I mean, the civil society ecosystem has very varying levels of capacity and professionalization. I mean, ultimately, what we did in Eurochild, what we do in a European civil society space, is precisely to be able to enable organizations that are on the ground, on the front line, with vulnerable children and families, speaking with them, also children being part of that, enabling them to build that capacity to also say what needs to be said to the decision makers, whether that be at local, regional, national, or European Union level, because public policies matter a great deal, and that experience, that knowledge of what works on the ground needs to be delivered. It needs to be communicated. So I wouldn't call it a burden. I think it's a necessary part of the skills and capacities that exist within a strong civil society ecosystem. It's not always the same people that need to do everything, but it needs to be kind of singing from the same song sheet, working together. You know, that's fundamentally a big belief of mine, that you don't create social change alone. You need, a wide spectrum of services of different skills and types of organizations that can be working together in a collaborative way. And I think necessarily civil society needs to be kind of at the top of its game in communicating and influencing. And we need more investment in organizations to build that capacity alongside, plugging gaps and being there for the children and families and communities that otherwise would fall by the wayside or feel marginalized, or living not being able to realize their rights, have fulfilling lives, etc. So I think there is a need for professionalization of and resourcing civil society to do the wide range of tasks that will deliver change.
Okay, well, we are back to the change and to the we can drive change, but we don't. What was your mantra? My value as a being does not. No.
Can't deliver change alone. So it's that collaborative. It's a collaborative effort. It's a collaborative effort.
It is a collaborative effort, and it's not the individual responsibility, but we should try. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that this conversation went into many different directions, but we'd always, every meeting with the guests goes to the last two questions, which are what makes you happy and what makes you hopeful. And I think that there are so many parts of you as a person that I find fascinating, not only through the Eurochild and leadership part, but I think that you really are a really self-aware person, and you spend a lot of time self-reflecting and trying to find explanation for yourself, which is not a lot of people I've met do that. So it's really
quite exhausting.
So I'm really curious to know what makes you happy.
Well, funnily enough, that inquiry makes me happy. That constant inquiry, I suppose, is something that I ultimately draw a lot of strength from. It's not always pleasant, but it is something that I just really like, sort of light bulbs going on, and I I would say, there's certainly a lot of material that I still need to work with. And so I suppose I quite like that. And that makes me happy. Alongside, where do I resource myself from? Nature, walking in the forest. I'm going to go and sleep 2 nights in the forest in a couple of days' time, which will do me a world of good. And spending time with my kids. So I feel I'm blessed in many ways with the sort of my surroundings, my family, and my interests, and the time that I have to invest in those activities outside my professional life.
And what makes you hopeful?
What makes me hopeful? Well, there's so much positive going on. There's so many different strands that I take that is sort of enlightening and positive and sort of connected. And there's this sort of growing level of consciousness. There's that other very cliched phrase, but you never solve the same problems with the same level of consciousness. So what's making me hopeful is that actually, there is this much wider level of awareness and consciousness at all different levels of society. So this is why I spend so much time on LinkedIn, because it just takes me down all sorts of rabbit holes. But it's pretty amazing what there is out there. So I'm imagining that, okay, on a sort of wider scale, we haven't really talked about the European Parliament elections and everything, that is really rather depressing and quite frightening on a kind of a wider level. But at the same time, if we kind of hone in on what good is happening out there, you also see a really interesting kind of bubbling under of visionary people and communities and conversations and goodness. And young people and children, that kind of, there's a lot of good stuff going on there beneath the surface that if we spend time there, that can be very nourishing.
That's a nice ending. I think that I always like to hear the answers, of course, of every question that we've discussed, but these last bits, they're always the most fascinating for me, because to see people discover hope in really different ways. And I like to explore that, because I think that it's a massive amount of how you see the world is how the world treats you at the end. I think that if you're capable of seeing hope, because sometimes you're not in a place to see hope. And I think that it's really important to make ourselves see hope in different places, because sometimes it's not a matter of it's not existing, but us not seeing it.
Absolutely.
So I'm happy you see hope in many places, and that's great.
Yeah.
And it's been really, really nice to talk to you and have this nice Bulgarian tea and share this nice tea with you and with everyone who's been spending the last hour and a few.
Yeah, sorry if it was a bit long, but I really enjoyed it, Maya.
Not sorry at all. I enjoy this conversation. That's my daily meditation for today. I hope you enjoyed it and it was as interesting for you as it was for me. And I hope to bring some hope to your day with this conversation. We are going back with another episode sooner, and I'm not going to tell who the guest will be. But as usual, it will be somebody from the EU bubble with great leadership skills and a lot of opinions and a lot of stories to tell. So until then, have a great day, be kind, search for hope, hug your dog, and just be a decent human being, because that's the most important thing at the end of the day. Thank you for being with us. Bye-bye.
Thank you.